And it's BBO War, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Tuesday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. True Crime Talk Radio is a segment here on Black Box Online Radio where I talk to you about multiple subjects within a single episode. And because today is Tuesday, we get to say hello to Snoopy. How's everybody doing? All right. It looks like we have several people in the chat. We have Batman66 here who says, Biba el Nedo. Muchas gracias, Senor Batman. Mike Frazzi is here who says, the title makes me think of the question nature or nurture. Well, Mike, in this episode, I'm going to be discussing the documentary, The Making of a Serial Killer, which is available on the Serial Killer Documentaries channel. And if you are a true crime follower and you have not subscribed to the Serial Killer Documentaries channel, or you're not a close follower of that one, I highly, highly recommend it. I think that you would find a lot of good information over there. They have so many resources on the Serial Killer Documentaries channel. But we're going to go through several different subjects today because this is True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And we have Jerome here, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. He says, hi, Ned. Hi, everybody. Hello to you too, Jerome. And we have Dark Side of the Moon, who says, Ned, Jerome, Batman, and Mike, hello. Hey, hello to you too. Lots of people are joining the chat. Cryan is Aussie Ellis, says, can't wait to learn. Dean Hatcher says, morning, Ned, from Nashville. And Charlie is here, says, hello, Ned. Hey, Charlie, don't surf. How's it going? So the first thing that I would like to begin with is the title for this episode, The Making of a Serial Killer. Now, I was watching this documentary on the Serial Killer Documentaries channel, and they introduced their subject by talking about a serial killer named John Wayne Gacy, who is perhaps one of the most famous serial killers out there. John Wayne Gacy is also known as the Killer Clown because he would dress up as his alter ego, Pogo the Clown. And they said that he was the ultimate psychopath. And I thought that this was a very bizarre thing for a true crime documentary to say because was John Wayne Gacy even a psychopath? For example, psychopathy is often diagnosed with what is called the Hare checklist. It is a 20-item checklist that has scores of 0, 1, or 2. It's named after Dr. Robert Hare. And in the United States of America, you need a score of 30 out of 40 or higher to be deemed a clinical psychopath. But in Europe, for example, in the United Kingdom, you only need a score of 25. And I was watching the Rotten Mango channel once, and they stated that John Wayne Gacy only scored a 27 out of 30 on the Hare checklist. So calling this guy the ultimate psychopath, I didn't quite grasp that, or I wasn't sure why they chose to do that. I guess it depends on which metric you'd be using, the European standards or the American standards. But there are serial killers out there that have much higher ratings than 27 out of 30. For example, I've talked to you guys before about the serial killer Peter London, who was a Danish serial killer who committed his first murder in the United States of America. That he went to prison, was let out of prison, was deported, sent back to Denmark, and then he went on to keep killing. Absolutely terrible. But that was an example of somebody who was 39 out of 40, much higher than John Wayne Gacy. And I remember back to the first ever documentary that I saw on John Wayne Gacy, and they were talking about how he just didn't fit into a lot of the different boxes and parameters about any type of medical diagnosis. He was someone that really challenged the system. And as somebody who is not a psychologist, I am not. As somebody who is not a criminologist, I am not. I'm just somebody who is watching the documentaries on YouTube, listening to podcasts, and reading books like anybody else. I began to notice that there are so many exceptions. There are so many patterns that just lead to nowhere. There are so many people that go against the trends. I'm even beginning to question whether or not these trends are valuable at all. There was another true crime documentary that I was watching on the Slice channel called How a Psychopath Thinks and Behave. And this is also one that wants to really explore the concept of how and why do people do what they do in their daily life. There was an individual that was featured in that named Dr. Matt Logan, and he was talking about how some people think that they can look into the eyes of a psychopath and determine whether or not they are a psychopath. And he's like, no, it doesn't work like that. Some people think that they can sense somebody's psychopathic tendencies because they have a cold personality. And he's like, no, it doesn't work like that. A key component of psychopathic behavior is that it relates to not only having the lack of empathy and the lack of a conscience and not feeling things for other people, what he stated was, and again, this documentary on the Slice channel, is that psychopaths actually have lots of emotions. Psychopaths actually have a lot of things that they might care about, but they do it internally. They have emotions for themselves, and a very big one is anger. They can get angry, especially if they feel humiliated and rejected. A narcissist can get angry if they feel humiliated and rejected. So psychopaths are also not always going to appear to be cold. They're going to appear to be very charming. They're going to be, well, let's just think about that. That's one of the first items on the hair checklist: glib and superficial charm. And when you watch a lot of interviews with serial killers, I mean, I've already talked to you about some. Maybe John Wayne Gacy came off as cold, but Peter London didn't. Ted Bundy is about so-so, because I always say we now know that Ted Bundy was a serial killer, so his glib and superficial charm was absolutely useless. But that is the impression that was given off. It's like he's not trying to be cold in a lot of the interviews. So psychopaths can be extremely deceptive. And earlier, on an episode of Zodiac Monday, I want to follow up with something that I heard on Jimmy Akin's channel. This is the one that came out about 8 days ago, when he was discussing the psychology of serial killers. And what Jimmy Akin said was that he thought that a psychopath is going to be incurable. A psychopathic serial killer is going to be incurable. They're just going to be at the point where nothing is going to get them out of this psychopathic mold. And what I said was, all right, that's fair enough, but that's conflating incurable with treatable. And, I've just listed off several examples about how, I've watched interviews with clinical psychopaths, and I just saw one on this new channel called People Think Deeper. Is that the name of it? And actually a relatively new YouTube channel, but they interviewed this clinical psychopath named Lewis. And I was also citing the interviews on SBSK, as well as Psychopathy Is and Jubilee. And to follow up with that, because this is an important follow up, they are all people who are clinical psychopaths that were featured in these interviews, and they were stating that they have gone through the process of treatment, and even though they are incurable psychopaths, they still have learned how to interact in society. And even Dr. Matt Logan, who was featured in the Slice documentary, is saying that, okay, psychopaths can learn cognitive empathy. They can learn how other people are feeling and how other people are behaving, and they should not do these things because it's illegal and not beneficial to them. They can understand things from a practical standpoint about how they should not inflict pain on other people because it's going to send them to jail, and they have more benefits about not going to jail. Fire Pixie is here, says good morning. Good morning to you too, Fire Pixie. Cryonis Osceolis says, really, all that anger and rage they suppress comes out, and it's frightening, like adult temper tantrums. Yes. But that means that they do indeed have emotions, and they do indeed experience these types of things. And on this Deep Thinking channel, they were interviewing, again, a clinical psychopath. And he said some things that I thought were very, very odd about this exact subject, when he's stating that he doesn't believe that he had emotions, which is really quite odd, because in a lot of these other interviews with clinical psychopaths, they're saying that they do have emotions, but he said he doesn't have emotions. He responds to stimulation. Like, he mostly just feels level, and he can kind of have stimulations that go up and down, and he needs to constantly find things to keep himself active, which isn't really a surprise about how and why so many psychopaths would go on to work in the corporate world, where they can just have this 80-hour work week where they have complex problems that they constantly have to try and solve, and they constantly have to try and interact with. But, he ultimately contradicted himself because of this thing that Cryan Isosiellis just said: rage. He says that he doesn't have emotions, he just responds to stimulation, but he openly said later on in the interview that he experiences rage. As a clinical psychopath, he had multiple events in his life when he experienced rage. One incident was there was an older man who just looked at him away, and it reminded him of a bad experience that he had with his father. So he just assaulted him, and he actually almost killed the person. And then in another instance, he got into an argument with his girlfriend, and she said something to him that, again, really bothered him. And he said that he saw rage. and like he just saw red, and he went red with rage, to quote the Count Marco letter, and he picked up a knife and he actually cut himself across the throat, and he wasn't even aware that he was doing this because he went red with rage. So to come back to Jimmy Akin's point about how, like psychopathic serial killers are not treatable, well, everyone that I was talking about in those four case examples that I mentioned were psychopaths who were receptive to treatment. But you might be wondering, are they on par with a psychopathic serial killer? Would any of the people in those interviews that I was talking about actually have committed murder? No, not to the best of my knowledge. But are they on par with a serial killer? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Because I just invite you to watch the interviews for yourselves. Because when I was watching the interview with the clinical psychopath on the channel Psychopathy Is, she was saying that what people don't understand about me is that there is no limit to what I will do. And as I said, she's been treated, so she knows not to do that, but she would have no problem murdering someone. And I was just, in the interview with Lewis that I was just citing, he stated that he didn't have murderous contemplations. Like, he didn't contemplate killing people, so he didn't think that he was going to become a serial killer. But if he ever did commit murder, he wouldn't feel things for the victims. So I think that this connection to adrenaline is definitely something that is going to be talked about very frequently when it comes to any type of serial killer, no matter whom it is. And just about responding to stimulation, only feeling emotions for themselves. Yes, they're going to feel things like fear. Maybe I can accept one statement that was included in one of the interviews when somebody said that they don't particularly experience happiness. What they experience is just excitement, adrenaline, thrills. All of that, I think, is completely consistent with how a serial killer is going to go about their activities and how they're going to plan and choose their victims. They are going to commit a murder, and they're not going to feel anything for the victims. Now, they're in the documentary, The Making of a Serial Killer, they were quoting Robert Hare when he stated that he believed that out of the entire populations, in the Western world at least, 1% of the population is a clinical psychopath. But I remember from reading the book, The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout, she estimates that it's actually 4%. And I absolutely would lean more toward it being 4%. And this is also, to quote Matt Logan, some other things that we have to remember about psychopaths. It's not as simple as somebody just scores a 30 out of 40 on the Hare checklist, and therefore, oh, well, that's what a psychopath is, right? Right? Number one, we have clinical psychopaths. Number two, we have subclinical psychopaths. Number three, we have secondary psychopaths. And what he was really trying to convey from the Slice documentary is that somebody can be psychopathic and someone can also be mostly psychopathic. What about somebody like John Wayne Gacy, who's going to score 27 out of 40 on the Hare checklist? By the American standards, he would not be a clinical psychopath. He was a horrible serial killer, one of the most vicious serial killers to ever exist. That is still very, very important, and it does affect the process that people have when they are trying to just survive in their day-to-day life, because this is something that can come up. And this is what these documentaries are trying to do. They're trying to warn you about. You can enter into a relationship with somebody, and maybe 1 year goes by, 2 years go by, 4 years go by, and then you see different sides of their personality. And people have psychopathic and sociopathic tendencies that they can hide and that they can remove and pull them into the shadows. All right, so we got some things in the chat here. We have Cat Daddy Steve, who says, number 4, we have demon-possessed psychos. Cat Daddy Steve, do you remember that literally or metaphorically as far as demon-possessed psychos go? Because some people are going to have these types of components in them that are really going to drive them to commit crimes. And I recently appeared on Jerome's channel, Mr. Belgique here, and we were talking about Jack the Ripper. And I was bringing up the show Dexter, and I said, like, the fictional TV show and book series Dexter has the serial killer who has what's called a dark passenger, where it's almost as if there's this alternate persona that either encourages him to kill or can take over during his moments when he chooses to kill. And I was like, who's the other real life serial killer that experienced that? And the answer is BTK, Dennis Rader. He called it Factor X. I blanked on it, and somebody filled me in later in the comments section. It's been a while since I've done some BTK episodes here on Black Box Online Radio. And you can always hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these discussions. And this is one where, like Factor X. And I think that that is just something that goes to show that there are certain mental components that exist with some serial killers and they don't exist with others. Because about having this type of almost like a secondary voice that drives people to kill. Now, in the making of a serial killer documentary, another point that was raised was that maybe, just maybe, some of these psychopathic serial killers learn how to create deceptive illusions. I mean, maybe BTK didn't even have Factor X. But what they do is they try to create more sympathetic diagnoses. They try to fake the symptoms of something else. And examples of this would be that somebody is going to try and pretend to be a schizophrenic when they are not. They're going to try and pretend to be a different type of psychotic when they are not, because they want to get a more lenient sentence. And in that episode on the Deep Thinking channel with the psychopath named Lewis, he openly stated, as a clinical psychopath, he committed countless violent acts, beating people to death. Excuse me, almost to death. As I said, the guy almost died, but ultimately he lived. Multiple times he beat people within an inch of their lives, but he didn't kill them. Okay, so he's doing that, but he said that he would go to court and he would put on a suit and tie and he would comb his hair over to one side and he would put on a very nice presentation. He would say the right things. He knew what people wanted to hear, so he would get lighter sentences. And with the activities of psychopaths, how do we truly know that they are telling the truth? Mostly, I think that BTK would be honest about Factor X, and it seems like it's something that is reasonable and I can comprehend. I don't necessarily see how he would benefit too much from having that as a defense. I don't think he would get off on anything for that, because he would basically be admitting that he was aware of what he was doing. It's almost just he has a mental problem that he's choosing not to deal with, but he's still completely aware of his faculties. And in the making of a serial killer, they talk about this very clearly. Some serial killers are going to try and create a person that they want to blame. Oh, what was the name of the one that John Wayne Gacy did? He created an alter alias. He stole the name of a police officer. Was it John Henley or something like that? And he would, just use that as to blame on somebody else. But Cat Daddy Steve says Richard Ramirez. Yes, Richard Ramirez was brought up a lot in the documentary The Making of a Serial Killer, but you guys know my stance on him. I think that he was a jerk and a criminal thug who got out of control, and just his behavior became worse and worse and worse, and it escalated to the point of murder. One serial killer, though, that they talked about even more frequently in The Making of a Serial Killer was John George Hay, who was the acid bath murderer. They made a movie about him called A is for Acid, which I saw on YouTube for free. Maybe it's still there. And while I'm not an expert on him, I had that same experience. He was a criminal thug who got out of control. John George Hay was somebody who was a con man. He would create these very deceptive and elaborate scams, and he would murder people and dissolve their bodies in acid. A is for Acid, the acid bath murderer. And so many times when I was watching that movie, I was just thinking, this guy's like Richard Ramirez, except he has a little bit more thought put into his plans. He's much more methodical, and he's not trying to come across as a slime ball. In fact, he's actually trying to come across as somebody, like Matt Logan said, someone who's going to be reasonable, charming, likable. He's a con man. Con man means confidence, man. And Dark Side of the Moon says, agree, Ned. It's like the documentary, The 24 Faces of Billy Milligan. I could see through his lies. Yeah, well, that's something that we got to talk about, like with Ted Bundy. Once you know that he's a serial killer and he's just pretending, oh, yeah, I'm Ted Bundy, I talk like this. He always has this giant smile on his face, and he's all acting like he didn't do it and he's not guilty. But we know that he was guilty. We know that he was a killer. So it's like it's just a pathetic act at that point. And with most of the other serial killers, very similar things. You see, with Richard Ramirez, why I keep calling him someone who is just a jerk that got out of control, Richard Ramirez didn't exactly do what Ted Bundy did. He would more just sit back in his chair at the trial. Your Honor, this trial's a joke. I got a pentagram on my hand because I'm smart. He would pretend to be a jerk and a douchebag, and he would ultimately get the affection of dozens, if not thousands, of women. Crazy. And we have Casbah who says, Cas- Cat Daddy Steve is right. Demon control killers. That's how Dexter was written. Yes, okay, sure. Casbah, you actually worked on the show Dexter, if I recall, right? And Cat Daddy Steve says, question, Ned, are you an atheist? No, I am not. And Mysteries with Mr. Belgique says, it's great to see you all here on BBOR. Yes, thank you for coming in every Tuesday and Thursday, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning with me, your host, Black Box Ned. And I should remind you guys that this show is also available for free downloads on Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts under the names Black Box True Crime and Black Box Podcast. Charlie says, I saw a lot about the acid bath killer. Yeah, terrible, terrible story, though. But there's something else that I want to talk to you guys about for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. It is now October, and we are in the heart and soul of baseball season and the playoffs. And we have seen the final game played at the Oakland Coliseum. And you longtime followers of Black Box Online Radio will remember that I said that famously the Oakland Coliseum was one of my favorite stadiums in all of sports. And coincidentally, when I was on Facebook once, I found this list of 70 popular stadiums in America for football, baseball, and basketball, including the arenas, yes, stadiums, arenas, the centers for basketball. They ranked the Oakland Coliseum at number 69. And I was like, what? That's one of my favorite stadiums because it's so massive. And, like I just would always think that if I went to watch the Oakland A's play baseball there, and I'm not an A's fan, but I would just go there and just kind of sit by myself with hundreds of seats around me that were empty so I could watch baseball and not have to talk to anyone. I like to talk to people for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, not during my baseball games. I'm just like laser focused on the pitcher's mound. But the Oakland Coliseum is something that is rather important in the Zodiac Killer mystery. And as previously stated in some other episodes, the Oakland Coliseum is one of the possible locations of the bomb that the Zodiac Killer was planning on detonating. And full credit to Sphere the Cube, who has talked a lot about this, that the Zodiac wrote something called the Z32 cipher, and he proposed that they was actually trying to reveal that the location of the bomb was the Athletics bullpen. And if you actually take the home plate of the Coliseum and bisect it, it goes to the burial site of a possible Zodiac Killer victim named Cosette Ellison. But we have to say, so long Oakland days, so long Coliseum. Oakland is losing all of their sports teams. Cat Daddy Steve says, every sports franchise now has no soul anymore. Pretty soon, all teams will be in Vegas. Well, it worked for the Golden Knights, right? Las Vegas Raiders. Something about that just doesn't sound right to me. And Casbah says, yes, and I'm currently assisting with Dexter, Resurrection, and New Blood. Casbah, I only watched the first 8 seasons of Dexter. I absolutely love that show. But I did not watch any of the New Blood ones. Dexter's a very different type of serial killer, and I watch a lot of true crime shows, and I saw one that was very short, about 5 minutes long, that was talking about a real-life serial killer that was one of the inspirations for Dexter. As I said, it appears that there are multiple inspirations, and that guy's name is even escaping me now, but what it looks like is some serial killers try to create justifications for their actions. And Dexter commits crimes because he's following something called the Code of Harry. He would go on to be a very, very vicious serial killer if his adoptive father had not put him down a straight pathway. But lots of other serial killers do things that are done in their own perverted, justified way, such as Leonard Lake. The making of a serial killer brought him up. And they said that Leonard Lake thought of himself as a warrior. He had a very big fascination with knights. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, whom I was talking about on a recent episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, he also thought that he was doing a good thing by cleansing the streets of prostitutes. And to be very, very clear, these people completely know what they are doing. They know that they are committing illegal actions. That's why they're going to be found not guilty by they won't be found not guilty by mental disease or defect, but they think that they are justified because it's a concept of dealing with psychopathic tendencies when some people are so extreme in terms of their own psychopathic behaviors that they don't even view human beings as anything more than objects. And I have so much trouble accepting that when I'm watching these shows about psychopathic serial killers because, on the one hand, they're just saying, well, we think of human beings as objects. Like Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, attacking women on the streets, get them off the streets. People like Leonard Lake, who was one of the boneyard killers, very vicious torturer, made snuff films. Yet at the same time, what else am I hearing from all these people? What else is everybody saying? They hate their mothers and they hate their fathers. Which one is it? Are human beings just objects? Or do they hate their mothers and their fathers? And I think it's the latter. And this is one of the reasons why people can't use the insanity defense very well. And I'm going to have to do a much larger presentation on this because this goes back all the way to the 1840s, if I recall. And in the making of a serial killer, they were talking about the Monotone rules, which is named for Thomas Monotone. And I really, really don't want to misstate stuff because this is important. And sometimes his name is written as McNaughton. But the Monotone rules were dealing all about being not guilty by mental disease or defect. Think about every type of serial killer that I've been talking about. Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez, John George Hay. All these people are very, very calculating. And it seems like they are completely aware of what they are doing. But this is something that was said in the making of a serial killer. Calculating, right? Creating the warrior persona, right? Is there a particular serial killer that comes to mind about someone who is trying to turn themselves into what? Some type of real life comic book character? They brought up the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer at Lake Berryessa. They're just all like, the Zodiac is acting like he is some type of warrior in his own right, carrying the gun and his giant knife, and he's wearing his hooded costume. He's going into battle or something. Purely in his own mind. And a lot of that stuff is just ridiculous, but that is how some of these people think. And I'm going to go back to one of those psychopathic interviews that I was watching about why would they do this? Why are they developing this warrior complex? Why are they trying to turn themselves into some real life comic book character? Why are they just developing these fascinations with weapons? In one of those interviews that I was citing, the person said the first time in his life he ever punched somebody, he got beaten up. The next time he got into a fight with somebody, a fist fight. And he didn't exactly win the fight, but he had the upper hand. Like he was injured, but he had the upper hand in the fight. And he walked away from that thinking that he was like God, that he was so powerful. And what did the Zodiac Killer say in the 408 cipher? To kill is the most thrilling experience. It's even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The Zodiac talked about hunting people for sport because man is the most dangerous animal of all. All of that, I think is just, encapsulated in that statement that the guy is sharing. And this is the reason why I watch these interviews with people who are clinical psychopaths, because, firstly, when people talk about this and they just make these very broad generalizations, like, sometimes you can call them out on that, especially when you're just somebody like me who's comparing and contrasting ideas. I want to be very honest. When someone tells you that a psychopath is not treatable, they don't know what they're talking about. I've given you numerous examples about how people say that they are psychopaths and they are treatable. But to provide a condition, I don't know if the treatments that I was discussing and the stories that I've been sharing would work for everybody. I don't think that it would function like an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. For example, somebody takes Prozac or Lexapro or Zoloft, and it improves the flow of serotonin. Okay, so if somebody has a problem with that, then that's the type of medication they need to take. Allegedly. Don't take too much and don't get messed up on it. But if somebody is a clinical psychopath, maybe the treatments won't be that universal and people are going to have to do things very differently. One of the treatments for psychopathy that was discussed when somebody just said it was 24-hour therapy. 24 hours. You're just under constant scrutiny and analyzation, and people are just monitoring your behavior to the nth degree. And Jerome says, here in Belgium, we have the Mons Ripper. Did you hear about him? No, I didn't, Jerome. Do you have anything else that you would like to share about the Mons Ripper? He has never been caught. And how are you doing? Oh, that's to a Dark Side of the Moon. Cat Daddy Steve said, Pfizer basically good for humanity and mental illness, basically bad for humanity and mental illness. Cat Daddy Steve, I cannot tell anybody to stop taking medications. I cannot tell anybody not to do what their doctor tells them. I've been through some of those things myself, and I didn't necessarily have a good experience with medication. And to be 100% honest, I stopped taking it against the advice of others, and I got better. I'm right here, right? So, again, that's just my own firsthand experience. I would never tell anybody a blanket statement across the board, don't take those types of products. And Julian is here who says, hello, Ned. What are your thoughts on Joseph Holt? Do you think he should be someone looked into? Oh, yes. And Julian, did you get a chance to hear the most recent live stream that we did on Jerome's channel, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique? We're doing a weekly panel discussion about the Zodiac Killer. Absolutely, Joseph Holt should be looked into, particularly for the disappearance of Donna Lass. And Donna Lass went missing on September 6th of 1970 while working at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. And we were comparing her case to the case of Bryn Rainey, who went missing and was murdered in 1977 by Joseph Holt. And DNA is connected him to the case. He was the murderer. Seems pretty open and shut. And it's just what's so fascinating about the similarities between Donna Lass and Bryn Rainey, a victim of Joseph Holt, is that Donna Lass worked the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift at the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino. Bryn Rainey was also an employee of the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino 6 years later, but she worked the 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. shift. So what Donna Lass would do is she works 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Then she goes to the casino and she just kind of chills at the tables because she didn't like to walk home in the dark. Bryn Rainey would go to the bar from, like sometime before 2 a.m. because her shift starts at 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. And she would just go to a bar, and that's where they think Joseph Holt may have met up with her. Terrible, terrible. But it's somebody who's an opportunistic predator preying on women. And 6 years. 7 years. That's not abnormal for a serial killer to have a period of activity that's that long or that short even. Lots of serial killers have reigns of terror from, let's see. No, there are no exceptions. Again, this is somebody like me just reading these stories and talking to you guys about them. And I release shorts here on Black Box Online Radio Monday through Friday. And the short episodes mostly focus on serial killers. They come out on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. My name is BlackboxNed88 on Instagram and TikTok. Otherwise, I'm just Ned Dahan or Black Box Online Radio. And we find so many stories when a serial killer is operating for 2 months. A serial killer is operating for 10 years. Is there an average? There might be, but how are we really classifying what a serial killer is? Because I think if the crime is financially motivated, like even somebody like John George Hay is difficult to classify as a serial killer if many of his crimes were for profit. As I said, he was a con man. That might be difficult. If you call him a serial killer for simplicity's sake, I wouldn't fault you. I probably will. But these definitions. So, a serial killer committing murders over a 6-year, 7-year time frame, absolutely. We should look more into Joseph Holt. And Julian says, I will check out Jed. That is very interesting. Who's Jed? Fire Pixie says, diet in your environment is more effective than medicine in some cases, in my opinion. Oh my God, Fire Pixie, where were you when I needed you 15 years ago? I learned all that stuff the hard way. You ever heard that phrase, before you diagnose yourself with depression, don't surround yourself with assholes? Make sure you're not surrounded by assholes. That's the exact one. And ultimately, yes. Because Because I used to find that as soon as I'm removed from the toxic environment and I'm no longer around these people that are trying to constantly destroy me, I don't have problems with anything. And I don't necessarily think that Prozac would have been the answer. Casbah says Pedro Rodriguez was a Brazilian serial killer. BTK is what the Dark Passenger came from. Oh, Casbah, was Pedro Rodriguez the inspiration for Dexter? Where this he's a serial killer who became somewhat of a vigilante, and he had reasons why he killed, and he goes on to become a podcast host. As I said, I saw like 1 5-minute video on him. Was that his name, Pedro Rodriguez? And he just goes on to share the stories, and he's talking a lot about it. But yes, the Dark Passenger, that sounds just like BTK's Factor X. Richard Delaney is here. He says hello. Okay, Julian. Julian says he was calling me Ned, but it came out as Jed because of the auto incorrect. It's cool. I like the name Jed. Down with that. Charlie says environment. Yes. Environment is very important. Can I share something with you guys that's a little bit outside of the true crime world? As many of you know, I follow these presentations online from Dr. Helen Fisher, who's the author of The Anatomy of Love. And I'm going to be very real with you for a second. I once just asked this to a group of people. They're actually my coworkers. And I wanted to know, why do I experience the same types of problems over and over again? And I asked somebody a question about, why is it that there's this thing about my personality where people think that they can manipulate me? And then he just said, dude, there you go with that negative self-image. And I was just like, whoa. I didn't say anything about my self-image. That has nothing to do with my self-image. I was just asking why people thought I was susceptible to manipulations, because what would happen is they would think, oh, this guy Ned, yeah, he's easygoing. I can say whatever I want to him. I can do whatever I want to him. But I'm going to be very honest with you guys. No, you can't. And then I'm an agreeable person. And as Jordan Peterson talks about this with agreeableness, first, the agreeable person is agreeable. Second, they feel underappreciated. Third, they feel resentful. Fourth, they terminate the relationship. I only did that 100,000 times. But I was just trying to ask that question. I genuinely wanted to know, like, what vibe am I giving off when it says, hello, everybody right here? Come manipulate me. What vibe do I give off? And Dr. Helen Fisher talks about this. Again, this is well outside of the true crime world. And she's saying that when somebody is thoughtful, they give off a certain vibe. When somebody is not assertive, they give off a certain vibe. When somebody is thoughtful and they are not assertive, you give off the impression that you're just trying to be a friend, that you just want to get along, that you just want to be in a gentle situation, and you don't want, money, sex, or power at all. You just want to be everybody's friend. And I was just like, finally, it took me 5 years to get an answer to that question. Everybody just wants to talk about self-image, self-esteem, the ego. Get that stuff out of here. Those statements are subjective. I would much rather understand things from a technical perspective about the big five personality traits, about the governing components of brain chemistry, about how tyrannical and benevolent someone it is. You give off the impression that you just want to be everybody's friend and get along. But as already stated, you partner the big five with the governing components of brain chemistry, so it's not going to work. You try to push somebody around for long enough, they're going to leave. And Fire Pixie says, I was on the head for meds for a little while and got off them myself, changed the environment and the way I eat, and things got so much better. Amazing, Fire Pixie. Keep it up. DNA King is here. He says, howdy. Howdy to you too, DNA King. Andrew WVA is here, my brother from West Virginia. He says there's going to be a news conference today giving an update on the Morgan Nick abduction case. I'm going to have to follow up on that one. I'm not super familiar. The case is from 95. I'm not familiar with that one, but I'll look into it. Mike Frazzi says, last week you mentioned wanting to interview Graysmith. What is your thoughts on him? I think he's a hack. Sorry. Oh, yeah, mostly, Mike. I think he's a hack as well. All I said was, I've reached out to Graysmith. I've contacted him. I've never heard anything back. But Robert Graysmith will be featured in the new documentary. This is the Zodiac speaking. Yeah, I think Graysmith books for entertainment purposes, but he presents them as true crime, I would say he's a hack. Charlie says, she may have gotten it wrong about Ted Bundy, but she's just said that the way the woman stroked her hand to the neck could tell him if she was vulnerable. Who said that specifically, Charlie? But I would expect that serial killers do have these types of methodologies that they're using. With a high-profile criminal, for example, let's look at Charles Manson. The prosecutor in the Manson case, not Bugliosi, but Stephen Kay, said that he learned about one of Charles Manson's methodologies, and that was that Charles Manson would look people in the eye, and if they would blink before him, he thought he could control them. How real is that? Who knows? But Stephen Kay said he knew about this, so ultimately he practiced, and he looked Charles Manson in the eye, and Manson blinked first because Stephen Kay practiced holding his gaze. And he said Charles Manson was so mad. Yeah. Serial killers and psychopaths do have tendencies like that. And I think Charles Manson would be a very good example of a clinical psychopath. And Jerome says, ego has not his place in the true crime world. It's some very abstract stuff, and it's not even certifiable. Mike Frazzi says, you sound like you're open-minded and you always ask questions. This is how people grow. Okay, Mike. I have so many questions for Graysmith about the Zodiac, about life experiences, about Arthur Leigh Allen, and about being a hack. Yes, I want to ask him about all this stuff about putting false information into his books. All of that. We could do 8 hours on that subject. And Andrew says, the press conference is supposed to start in about 20 minutes. Well, this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning will be winding down by that point, but I look forward to hearing more about this story. Charlie says, a therapist with a PhD said they gave pictures of women, and Ted Bundy would look at how the woman was carrying herself or the simple way of stroking her hair. I don't know what it was with Ted Bundy and the hair, but you remember he had that partner named Stephanie Brooks, the one who rejected him, and he mostly chose his victims because they looked like her. Perhaps he found that image to be attractive. I guess he had some issue going on with the hair and the hairline and so on. And also, maybe he actually was somewhat aware and perceptive of things to the point where he could realize that this is an indicator of vulnerability. And I've never heard that exact thing about Ted Bundy, but it doesn't surprise me. And we have to remember that these people are a little bit twisted. Even if they are aware of their mental faculties, they are a little bit twisted, and they are deranged. Andrew says, Morgan Chantel Nick, September 12th of 1988, disappeared 95, is an American girl who was abducted at a Little League baseball game. And I'm not familiar with the story. I was born in 88, though. A couple of months before, I was born in May of 1988. Is this a story from West Virginia, Andrew? And Charlie says, all Ted's patients had her hairline. Do you mean all of Ted's victims? I don't recall Ted Bundy having too many patients, although he did work for that suicide crisis hotline. And it says she might have confused the name Ted with someone else, but she just graduated and might have remembered. No, that sounds like something that Ted Bundy would have done, because, again, I called out Pat Brown for this, the criminal profiler, when she's just like saying people are making assumptions about serial killers. I'm like, a lot of the times, serial killers choose their victims based on physical appearances. Ted Bundy, perfect example. So many serial killers are lady killers. They target women because they're attracted to their physical appearances. And back to the making of a serial killer. What did I say? Between 1% and 4% of the population are psychopaths. If you were to divide the psychopathic population into male and female sections, how many people would be on the male side and the female side? The documentaries that I was just watching, The Making of a Serial Killer, estimated that it would be at 90%, 9 to 1. Men are going to be psychopathic to female, 9 to 1. There are female psychopaths. And when I was watching one of these videos, it might have even been the Peter London interview, but somebody wrote in the comments section that his ex-wife was a clinical psychopath, and she scored a 40 out of 40 on the hair checklist. He insisted that he was not joking. That's pretty intense. 40 out of 40. Oh, and Andrew says the Morgan Nick case is from Arkansas. All right, I will look into that one. But all right, everybody, this episode of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning is winding down. Thank you so much for sharing everything, especially all these good questions and comments about serial killers. And if there's anything else you would like to put in the comments section, you can drop it there. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. My name on Facebook is Ned Dahan, and I also have blackboxned88 on Instagram. And if you want to support this channel, you can go to buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. Anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And there's always the super thanks on YouTube, super chats here. And no matter what, though, I just want to say that I appreciate you guys for listening and weighing in on these discussions about the true crime world, everything under the sun or in the darkness. And I will be with you tomorrow for Ripper Wednesday, talking about Jack the Ripper. All right, that'll be all for me now. Until next time.